And at the same time, we know that restoration and protection of nature potentially can provide 30% of the solution. Now, the good news is that in COP28, there was this commitment to tripling renewable energy by the end of this decade, and at the same time to protect nature. And from our point of view within BirdLife, we need this renewable energy revolution, and we need it to take place in harmony with nature, which is why from this COP at COP28, we need to ensure that the decisions that go from here include respect for and the value of nature as part of the green transition we need, essentially replicating the messages that came out of the Cali COP on biodiversity to ensure that the climate change and nature conservation agenda go hand in hand. So in order to deliver this transition, to deliver our net zero and nature positive world, governments, the private sector, including the financial sector, and of course civil society, all have a role to play. And so what we've done today is we brought together a panel who represent all of those different sectors, and we want them to really provide some inspiration, to tell some stories about how they are delivering for biodiversity while delivering a renewable energy future. And we know that each individual sector has a different role to play, whether it's about ambition, the policy environment, whether it's about knowledge, whether it's about driving the investment in these technologies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to welcome you, introduce you to each of our panelists, and then each of them in turn are going to give a story to explain how they're trying to deliver renewable energy in harmony with nature. So we are waiting for our first panelist, Martha Castillo, who is here. Martha Castillo. That's fine, you're very welcome, and perfect timing. And this is a great entrance. Anyway, so Martha, maybe we'll allow you to be second, Martha, but so Martha is the Principal Executive and Technical Advisory on Biodiversity and Climate at Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. And then sitting next to Martha, we have Gonzalo Sanz de Miera, Director of Climate Change and Alliances at Iberdrola, the co-sponsor of today's event. And then next to Gonzalo, we have Emily Kelly, who works for the World Economic Forum, and she is the Blue Carbon Action Partnership lead and the Ocean Agenda lead. And then next to Emily, we have Joseph Anoja, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, which is the partner of BirdLife in Nigeria. And then finally, we have Elliot Whittington, who is from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And remind me of your job title, Elliot, because it's now crowded, I can't read it. So Elliot is Chief Systems Change Officer, so no pressure with that job title. Okay, so I think actually maybe I'll ask you to start, Gonzalo, if I may, because I think that, and maybe give a little story about projects or programs that Iberdrola is working on to try and deliver renewable energy in harmony with nature. About 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for inviting or for organizing this workshop together, this event together. As you were saying, we are suffering several crises at the same time. Climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, but also energy crisis, air pollution crisis. And one of the main origin of all these crises is an energy model based on fossil fuels. And we have to move from fossil fuels to renewables. And this energy transition or ecological transition will be not only good for nature in terms of climate change, biodiversity, air quality, water, but it will also be good for the economy because we are seeing a technological revolution of green solutions that are the cheapest option nowadays to decarbonize the economy. And they can create jobs, more jobs, and for this reason, for instance, renewables are moving really fast. In Iberdrola, we are working on that. We are an energy company, and the energy model based on fossil fuels is the main cause of climate change. So we are changing our energy system from fossil fuels to renewables. We don't have now fossil fuels, and we are investing just in renewables and networks and storage. But we are working to assure that this energy transition is not only good for climate, we are at the climate COP, but is also good for biodiversity and local communities. So we have the most ambitious objective for climate change in terms of energy reduction and so on. But we have set ourselves an objective of having a net impact on biodiversity by 2030. And we have approved a biodiversity plan, including the impacts of all species, all ecosystems for all our facilities, existing facilities and new facilities. And just this year, by 2025, all the new facilities that come into the system are nature positive, and already 10% of the existing capacities have a plan to be net positive in terms of biodiversity. So this is what we are doing, but we are, as you said, I'm the Director of Climate Change and Alliances. To do this, we are working on alliances because the challenge is so huge that we cannot do it alone. So we are working, of course, we have an alliance with BirdLife International. You are helping us to develop this transition in harmony with nature. We are working with Business for Nature. We are working with the Spanish Green Growth Group. I'm the chairman, and we presented in Cali a manifesto for more ambitious objectives and more policies. We are working, of course, with the web. We are working with UNEP. We are working with everyone. And of course, we're working with BirdLife International, but also with the national partners, with BirdLife, with RSPB. And our message is that we have to do this. It's possible to be in harmony with nature, and we are proactive. And we are sending society the message, sending society and policymakers that we need ambitious objectives and we need policies that move forward the energy system, but in general, the economy towards this direction. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gonzalo, and indeed for your leadership in this space. I should say at the end of the panel session, I will check if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll carry on the conversation. And can I just check, can you hear everybody clearly? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, I think I will turn to you then, Marta. It's great that you're here, and maybe you'd like to give a perspective from a development bank.
Martin, thank you. It's working? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and sorry for the delay. I'm just running from the other side of the COP. So the workout for today, check it. And it's 10 a.m. So great, thank you. My name is Marta Castillo. I'm part of the Climate Action and Biodiversity Department at CAF. CAF has a tremendous goal in order to be the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. That means that we are making a really big challenges facing to 2026. That's our goal. And we want to have the 40% of the total approval of CAF as a green investment. And in addition, and a really strong work with the countries, with the private sector, with the public sector, with the alliances like Iberdrola and other companies in the region in order to promote the green investment, in order to promote the changes in the region to be really sustainable. I mean, America Latina is facing not only the climate change crisis, is losing the biodiversity every day. So 2 weeks ago, we were in Cali with a tremendous agenda in order to improve, in order to move forward the whole region, just change the set in the mind in order to work together with many different actors regarding the biodiversity. So we know the challenge is huge, but we have there is a tremendous experience from the climate change convention, the instruments here in the Kyoto Protocol, now the Paris Agreement, the Article 6. So we know the transition to more integrated, integral instruments will take time, but there is a lot of experience and there is a lot of interest to work together. So I think that's the idea that we have right now in mind and that we are working in the region. Thank you, Martin.
That's great. Thank you very much, Marta. If you pass the microphone on the panel, I think we'll move straight to Emily to give a perspective from the World Economic Forum.
Thanks so much, Martin. And congrats to my amazing colleagues on the panel here who are doing the double-header COPs. I'm very impressed by your commitment to nature and climate, and that comes with a lot of running around the last meeting and now this meeting. So yes, really good COP workouts. Totally hear you. I'm so pleased to be here on behalf of the World Economic Forum to share a little bit more about what we're doing in this space. And really to talk most extensively about the Responsible Renewables Infrastructure Initiative that we've launched. And very happy to be doing so with Iberdrola and with BirdLife International. So, of course, we are all here with this goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C, and we know that we must triple our renewables by 2030, which is necessitating significant infrastructure development on both land and in sea. So at New York Climate Week this past September, the forum launched the Responsible Renewables Infrastructure Initiative. And this is with the goal to come together with experts from some of the largest players in renewables, backed by influential and knowledgeable civil society partners, to think about how we can accelerate equitable expansion of renewable power infrastructure globally and mainstream responsible deployment practices to benefit communities and nature. Over the past year, we've partnered with industry leaders and civil society experts to develop consensus on pathways for a rapid energy transition that supports global nature positive goals and benefits local communities. And we've provided a platform for all relevant stakeholders to contribute to the dialogues, most importantly, to foster consensus around this issue. With the insights we've gathered, we're planning to launch the Principles of Responsible Deployment of Renewables at our annual meeting in Davos this coming January, with commitment from key CEOs and governments. Additionally, we've analyzed offshore wind's impact on marine ecosystems, identifying key actions companies can take now to reduce negative impacts and foster positive outcomes for biodiversity and communities. We'll launch a report called Nature Positive, Role of Offshore Wind, as part of the Sector Transition on Nature Positive series. And hopefully this will provide a blueprint for other technologies. As we work to build consensus on measuring renewable infrastructure's impact on people and nature, we must also drive action. The first is in encouraging corporate commitments to responsible development practices. And the second is support of governments in crafting effective regulations and standards. So at this upcoming Davos, we'll use this as a milestone for mobilizing evidence-based, ambitious actions to scale renewables sustainably and deliver lasting value for society and the environment. And we invite all partners to contribute towards this transformational goal. And thanks so much. Looking forward to the broader discussion.
That's great. Thanks so much, Emily. And just to say to speakers, if you take your headsets off, I think when you're speaking, otherwise you won't get it, otherwise you'll get interference, I believe. Oh. Yeah, so if you take them off while you're speaking, I think you have to take them off completely. Oh. Sorry. But you came through loud, Emily, you came through loud and clearly to me anyway. So Joseph, do you want to give a civil society perspective and also some experiences from Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much for having me here. So first of all, I need to give a background about the condition in Nigeria, the situation in Nigeria. So 45% of Nigerian population, which is Nigeria is about 240 million people. So 45% of that number is completely energy poor. They have no access to energy at all. So if you expand that to look at people who have some form of energy, you're talking about over 100 million people without sustainable energy. So that gives a background of where we are in Nigeria. It gives the opportunity and it gives the problem at the same time. And therefore, when you want to talk about renewable energies in Nigeria, then we have to look at it because it's going to be, that's an expanding ecosystem that we have in Nigeria for renewable energies. What our concern is how this expansion will happen in a nature positive way. Because, I mean, you talk about 240 million people and you want them to have access to energy. Yeah, that means you have to develop infrastructure that will get there. And if there's a transition from fossil fuel to renewable energies, that means most of that energy has to come from renewables. And that means there will be massive infrastructural development. And how to make that to ensure that that development comes not at a cost to nature. It's our responsibility for civil society like ours to continue to watch out and be on the lookout on the horizon to ensure that whatever development is happening is going to be nature positive at the end of the day.
Joseph, thanks so much for giving the perspective of Nigeria. I mean, it's interesting to note, for example, that the World Bank recently have set up their Mission 300 to try and get 300 million Africans to get electricity by the end of this decade, and for that to be a distributed renewable energy grid. So the ambition is huge, but to do it well is also important. So thanks very much. And finally, Elliot, if you want to give your perspective, and then we'll just check to see if we've got any questions from the group. Otherwise, I'll continue the conversation here. Elliot.
Great. Thank you, Martin, and thank you to everybody involved in this panel. I think it's a really important conversation. I actually, to start off with, I just want to kick off in terms of referencing back to some of the things that you said, Martin, at the beginning, because you talked about the need to transform the economy to protect nature, and I think that from my perspective in CISL, that's really key. When we talk about nature protection, it's often a lot of the conversation ends up focusing on the really important activities and actions that need to take place to protect nature where it is undisturbed, and ensure that we keep as much undisturbed nature, keep as much sort of original nature as possible. But the reality is, as I think Joseph just set out very clearly, the economy exists, human activity exists, and it is damaging nature far too much, and we need to shift the way it operates to reduce that impact on nature. The CISL, the institute that I work in, we're all about trying to work to change the economy, and we do that through a number of ways. So we're part of the University of Cambridge, but we work through research and education, but also convening and innovation support to try and find ways to unlock that kind of change. And particularly on this aspect, we're increasingly trying to work on to try and raise the conversation around, raise the focus on nature, because we think there's so much more that needs to happen. And the topic of this session is really fundamentally important, that concept about building alliances. So for example, I say we convene, we run the Corporate Leaders Group, which is a partner of the We Mean Business Coalition, and so one of the hosts of this pavilion, which includes Iberdrola as a active member. And through that, we have worked in terms of bringing together business voices to support nature protection. So particularly intervening in Europe, mobilizing business voices to support the EU nature restoration law that was it passed, but it passed in the face of significant opposition. So making sure that there is a kind of clear business voice speaking up, as Gonzalo has done so clearly here, about the value of nature, and saying that actually no, business does want to see an economy that works to protect nature, and these two, the economy and nature are not inherently in tension. That also plays through in other aspects of our work. So, for example, we've done a lot working with the financial sector, trying to improve how financial services understand nature in their analysis of risk, in their analysis of opportunity. And we're really pleased to be part of a major research project called ATRAC, which brings us together with the Capitals Coalition, WBCSD, a whole suite of different actors, which is looking at understanding how the impact of finance on nature, what the different models of accelerating the flows of finance towards more nature-positive economic activities. And it's also looking at business models and mapping different business models. And we're pleased we can work with our sort of entrepreneur and startup community to try and get more innovative, nature-positive business models taking off. Fundamentally, the role of collaboration has been really, really important. So we've got ATRAC, we've got our Corporate Leaders Group, but we're also part of these big global alliances, such as Business for Nature, such as We Mean Business, and others. And it's about trying to build, this is to get to the level of ambition that we all collectively want to get to. We need to see that kind of overall momentum building, which is about kind of bringing together different groups and ensuring these messages are heard in all the places that they need to get the kind of levels of changes that are important to turn back the tide that we're currently experiencing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elliot. You've all been listening to what you've been hearing. Can I just check to see if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask now? Otherwise, I'm going to start a little bit of a conversation with the panel. If at any point you do have a question, just raise your hand and we'll make sure we get a microphone to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Carolina. I am from Colombia. I work for the World Resources Institute. And as you may all know, we are a mega diversity country, but also we are just starting our just energy transition. So my question is going to Marta, of course. And I would like to understand, well, last year we have in Colombia a workshop with different companies, hydroelectric companies, actually, energy companies, trying to understand what are the challenges and the opportunities to accelerate natural-based solutions for the energy sector. And we understand there are some challenges related to finance. So how we can understand how we can move parallel or together the biodiversity agenda and the just energy transition agenda in South America or in our megadiversity countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta.
Thank you for your question. And of course, we are working in trying to build that bridge. And first of all, one of the things that we are right now doing, it's a new 300 million facility for conservation and preservation, but also with the participation of the private and the public sector in order to promote the conservation in the private sector and the economic area for the conservation. Second, also we know we need to make more innovative instruments. Right now we are working with the GCF in a $150 million project that includes energy transition, renewable energy, to be honest with you, in 4 countries, Chile, Peru, Panama, and Ecuador. And the idea of this project is trying to move the financial institutions to build the sustainability with them. So the project includes two main pillars. One is to build capacity in the local financial institution. So how to deal with the climate change, with the biodiversity, and on the other hand, it's a specific line in order constitutionality line to promote the transformation from the small scale companies to renewable energy, land use, and energy efficiency. That we are doing in the context. So it's the same thing that you are doing, that you were just mentioned. I mean, we have to build the capacities also in the financial sector in order to deal with the challenges of the climate change. Not only the climate change, of course, the biodiversity, but sometimes what means, I don't know, nature-based solutions, which sounds great, but when you are working in a project, what means that? Well, how you are going to put that in practice? How you are going to make the financial analysis in that case? How you are going to highlight the environmental and economic benefits in the natural solution? That's something that you have to work with at local level. Of course, inside the CAF, we are also doing the same work in order to be, because we are transforming all inside the bank in order to move forward in terms of the sustainability with a complete concept in terms of the climate change, biodiversity, and the other environmental goals beyond the compliance of the safeguards. I mean, beyond of the compliance of the regulations. Thank you. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. And just to say that in Colombia, #1 nation for birds in the planet, CAF and our partner in the US, Audubon and BirdLife, signed an agreement to try and mobilize investment. I was doing, it's okay, it's a partnership. Mobilize investment to protect migratory birds across the flyway of the Americas, and also to ensure that the investments are benefiting people and climate along the way. So there was another question here. Just
thank you very much. I'm from Japan, so my question is rather in a developed country situation, so probably Iberdrola, CSL, and WF. I understand that the EU nature restoration law, which was recently adopted, it exempt the renewable energy project under the strict regulation. And also UK biodiversity net gain is also exempt for renewable energy development. Could you share your view on this? Because the reality is still renewable energy is prioritized than nature. Nature is not prioritized, or nature is a little bit lower priority issue. So could you share, because you mentioned about your beautiful initiatives or principles, but in reality in the politics, and particularly probably renewable energy sector push not to include renewable energy project under the restriction of the nature restoration law or biodiversity net gain. So could you share your view and observation on this reality?
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to go straight to you, I think, Gonzalo.
Okay, very good question. We are really working on trying to develop renewables and networks in harmony with nature. And I have to tell you that we are trying to reduce the impact at maximum. Nowadays, we go much beyond of regulation. Why do we do that? For two reasons. First, because we have objectives of being nature positive. And second, and this is the most important thing, for public acceptance. Why? Because apart from the administrative pressure, there is the social process. And nowadays, society all around the world won't accept a project or infrastructure that, even if it's good for climate, has a negative impact on biodiversity or local communities. For us, local communities and biodiversity goes together. Having said that, all economic activities have an impact on nature, okay? And renewables have an impact of nature. However, the impact of nature is much, much lower than the impact of fossil fuels. The big difference is that in the case of renewables, we see the impact. This is not the case with fossil fuels. So if if CO2 had a color, a red color, so you will see the impact of burning gasoline or diesel in your car. Not in your car, I mean in a car. Maybe you have an electric car. And people will understand that. So that means that we have to reduce the maximum and going beyond regulation in terms of impact of renewables on biodiversity. However, we have to understand, and we all have to accept, including environmental NGOs, that renewables will have an impact and that renewables needs to be there. Otherwise, we won't solve the climate crisis. And if you don't solve the climate crisis, you are not going to solve the other crisis because we, as you were saying, Martha was saying, this goes together. So we need to work together, biodiversity and climate, to be sure that all actions and all this energy revolution, because this is an energy revolution, we have to do, and we have to do it urgently, is done in harmony with nature. So we have to work in alliances and work all together.
Gonzalo, I'm just going to follow up on the question, though, which was specifically around the EU context. So I know that as a company, Iberdrola did call for the nature restoration law, but equally, the questioner is correct in saying that actually the European Union has basically prioritized renewable development in some areas and made it exempt from some forms of regulation. I just wondered if you want to just comment on that sort of clash, I suppose.
This is a very important issue. We don't want lower environmental regulations because this is not good for us. What we want is clarity, and we are working with, for instance, the partners of BirdLife International to define, sightings where the impact is much lower. This is what we need. And for Europe, we are defending, the problem with Europe is not just climate change, it's the energy crisis and the energy dependency. So we need to accelerate, especially in Europe, moving from fossil fuels to renewables. And where can we do that? I mean, I think it will be good to agree between environmental NGOs, science is very important, and government zones, particular zones where the impact will be lower and the process will be faster. Because, as you may know, to develop a wind farm, for instance, in Europe, may take up 10 years to build it. And I think we cannot afford this with the climate crisis we are suffering and with the energy crisis we are suffering. So we have to understand each other and to work together. I mean, the point of science is really important because governments need to rely on science and on scientists and biologists to define where to develop these infrastructures.
Great, Gonzalo. I'm going to carry on the theme a little bit going down the panel, and then I'll open it back out to the panel, but to the audience. But Emily, be interested to get your perspective, what you think the motivations are for some of the businesses that want to join your Responsible Renewables initiative, and say a little bit about the motivation around that.
Well, I think we have a perfect example of that sitting next to me. So inspired by your words, and maybe to add a little bit to the last point also, that one of the key pieces is really in supporting governments in incorporating this agreed upon nature and people related criteria into their renewable energy auctions and for tenders to reward responsible practices. So that's certainly a goal from our side as well, and really appreciate the question and as well as Gonzalo's response to that. And I think as I was chatting with Martin and colleagues beforehand, one of the key goals for the work that the forum is engaged in right now is to really help with the race to the top. And so in having companies that are really motivated to be moving forward and to be coming to consensus with experts and colleagues is a huge way to send a signal that there are those companies that are looking for this type of regulation, and that they should we need to find ways of supporting that so that we can have both our climate and biodiversity goals met. And to echo the other statements made by others, we need both of them. Of course, as we know, they both feed into each other. And so ensuring that we're able to safeguard against for both is so important.
Thanks, Emily. And then just moving on then to your context, Joseph. I mean, you talked about the absolute urgent need for getting electricity to 100 million Nigerians. But just from your point of view, what conditions do you think will need to be in place within Nigeria to allow you to deliver that energy transformation in a way that doesn't cause harm for nature? So what's your perspective that's needed in Nigeria?
So as I mentioned earlier, the situation in Nigeria gives us an opportunity to do the right things, especially that we are learning from others. And the time to do it is now. For instance, we know that time-tested and well-researched tools like the IBAT and then the AVISTEP, that is the avian air sensitivity mapping tool, which has been deployed successfully in other climes, can also be done. And it's better to do it now before such discussion come on board in terms of the renewables. And in terms of financial and capacity needs for such to happen, I think it's better that that is done now. Because sometimes when the rush comes, then some of these things are missed. And it's not for us to just do it for doing sake, but also follow it through. Because from the feelers I'm getting, the situation of the UK also requires monitoring. Because at the end of the day, yeah, the monitoring, the sensitivity mapping has been done, everything has been put in place, but what about the monitoring afterwards? So all of these things are lessons for us to be able to learn. But what I'm calling on is for us to do it now, because it's better to do it now than when the discussion starts. Because when the discussion starts, what especially the politicians will be looking at is just, oh, we want to see everything on ground. Because politicians, what they want to see, what they want is what people will see and praise them for. But so that is why we need to be ahead of the curve, so that whatever happens, we've already had everything on the ground, we'll be able to direct them. And if there are another advantage is if we have all of these things on the ground now, it helps us to be able to direct the discussion. Oh, because before they come, we'll have the data and present to them that this is what we have done, and you don't need to go to where sensitive areas. Avoid sensitive areas. These are the areas that you should be doing, because all they see is just maybe probably bare land or bare places for infrastructures to come up. But if we are able to show them with data that these are the right places to put up your infrastructure, it helps us and it builds credibility into the project as well. So as I said earlier, I'm still saying again, the emphasis is on financial and capacity assistance, so that will be done now before any of these projects come on board, especially for Nigeria, because it's a huge market and we are growing. In fact, it's been shown that Nigeria needs for energy is growing. We need about 40 terawatts of energy per hour, which is huge. And imagine that we have less, we're talking about tera, and then we have just giga. So it's really, really huge, and it's a huge market.
There you go, Iberdrola. That's a new market for you to open up, Gonzalo. Elliot, I just thank you. That's incredibly clear, learning the lessons from the past. But Elliot, of course, historically within the business community and this space, there is this tension between pace of rollout and obviously competitive advantage. And what Joseph has just outlined, could be perceived as a cost in terms of, and potentially constraints in terms of delivery of renewables. I just wonder, in the conversations you have, particularly with the business leaders within CISL, just how do they reconcile those two things? You just maybe share your perspective with the audience.
Can I also just kind of go back to the questions as well? Yeah. Just because I think what you asked is a fundamentally important question, and we need to not pretend that there aren't trade-offs, and we need to not pretend that there isn't an environmental impact for any infrastructure project. But as Joseph has set out very compellingly in emerging markets, but also in industrialized countries, we need new infrastructure. We can't we need to be able to reshape the nature of the economy. So we can't just say no to everything in order to make progress. Particularly, so in principle, should some part of what we do be exempted from our efforts to protect nature? No. We should be looking at every project and making that call and basically looking at its environmental impact, weighing up that against a counterfactual of what other options there are, weighing it up against what the costs of reducing that impact are, all of those kind of things. Everything we do should go through that. The reality is, in many European countries, pretty much across Europe, we have got ourselves into a situation where we're not very good at doing that quickly, and that is having an effect in terms of stopping us being able to do the things that we need to do in terms of changing the economy into a less impactful one. So we've got to solve that. The exemption feels like a very blunt, very big hammer to crack that, and maybe wouldn't necessarily be my preferred one, but we have to. There is a real thing there, and that it is realistically. I also think the renewables industry, as I suspect Gonzalo has been setting out, has a really good story to tell. At a practical level, there are examples, where, for example, you're converting heavily farmland into solar farms, and you're seeing a definite increase in the availability of biodiversity. I think there is. So we should look at all the kind of angles of that story, but we shouldn't avoid that. But there are all sorts of things that we need to navigate, and I think that links back to the question you were saying, Martin, in terms of what's the kind of business attitude to how they navigate this, and this is a thing that we've been reflecting on quite a lot, because it relates to the reality of the whole sustainability story and the way that businesses have been thinking about sustainability. After Paris, particularly, I think there was a strong signal sent into the business community that the world was committed to taking climate impact and increasingly broader sustainability impact seriously. All sorts of things flowing out from that. So the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and the way that mainstream climate risk into financial decisions, or is starting to mainstream climate risk into financial decisions. But the reality is the shape of markets mean that making the right choice in sustainability terms is still too often the wrong choice in commercial terms. It's particularly in terms of short-term commercial terms. And we're not going to make the progress that we need to make until we change that. And some of that is about regulation. It's about making sure that we've got the stronger laws in place. And some of that is about the availability of finance, as you were talking about, and helping a financial system to understand sustainability impact. Because, and this is one of the challenges in terms of availability of finance for nature positive, is that the climate story, we're still working through that. Climate story is much, much simpler than the nature story. And so we work, for example, with the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures and are trying to kind of support businesses in terms of adopting and incorporating that into their analysis. But it's hard. The metrics are much more complicated. The understanding of that is much more complicated. So there is a challenge we have to reconcile. There is absolutely appetite to do that from the business community, not from everybody. Like, the business community is not monolithic, but investors and many business leaders do want to be able to operate. They want to be able to run their businesses successfully, commercially, but also in a way that isn't destroying the kind of fundamental basis of their long-term viability and everybody else's viability and the communities and the environment that they're part of. Of course they do. So there are allies in the business community, but that they are working within a system. And so that this is the challenge that's set to me every day by my job title, which is actually we do have to come back and change the system they operate within.
Thanks so much, Elliot. That was incredibly helpful. I'm just looking at the audience, see if there's anyone else have some questions. Yes, and then I'm going to come back to the panel in a bit.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Humphreys from the Nature Conservancy, working on European climate policy. So thank you for having this important discussion, and also to everyone on the panel for the important work that you're doing. At the other side of the COP, they're currently announcing some energy pledges today. There's one on green energy corridors. The word biodiversity doesn't feature anywhere in that pledge. So I'm just wondering, how can we, as a movement, and I know many of you spoke about building alliances, how can we try and elevate this conversation more into the mainstream of the energy transition conversation? Because I think there is a strong interlinkage between the nature piece and the communities piece. And so how can we build a good narrative around that? And I'm thinking next year, if we're at COP30 and there's energy pledges, I would want to see some pledges around nature and renewables going hand in hand. And so how can we try and make that happen together and build alliances towards that? Thank you.
Brilliant question. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Anyone want to offer a view on how we actually get this agenda more squarely onto the stage of the COP negotiations? Anyone want to offer a view? Gonzalo.
I think we have to understand that firms, we are the most interested parties to assure that these pledges include all factors needed to be achieved. Imagine, we are one of the biggest investors in renewables in the world. So I want in this pledge biodiversity and local communities to be accepted. This is a bit the reason of this event, to bring together alliances. Imagine WEF. WEF, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have CLG, we have CAP, we are members of a lot of business alliances. And I think the stronger, the best way is that on business, we business tell society and governments and policymakers that we want renewable pledges to be accompanied by biodiversity pledges. So this is the idea. Last year we had another event, similar event here, talking about presenting different alliances. But now what we are seeing that all alliances are aligned with this objective. I think we have to present something together, really strong, maybe channeled by women business, saying we want accelerate climate action in harmony with nature. We want to accelerate, and including local communities. I think this is really important. But for the public to understand that is that we are doing not this just for nature. We are doing that because for our own business. This is because as Elliot was saying, we have the vision that there is no sustainable economy without sustainable environment. And there is no public acceptance without infrastructure development in harmony with nature. This is the key. But at the same time, I think if I have to ask something, this is from business and from NGOs and from civil society to support this idea that we have to accelerate energy transition and that to recognize that it will have some impact. We have to understand, to ask for the minimum impact. because sometimes we are facing with environmental organizations that they want to stop renewables. Okay, I understand that for biodiversity reasons, but not for climate, so we have to do it together. Thank you.
Marta, go straight ahead.
Thank you for your question.
I can hear you clearly.
But I think it's some...
You got some feedback?
Interference
If you
with
just
the-
take it off, I think probably okay.
I really turn off. Okay, so that's a really good question, and I think one of the things that you can see here is that all these entities have different mandates, but we are working in the same goal. So it's not possible to find a perfect solution working without the other ones. I mean, we have to work together, first thing. The second thing I think is really important is that we need to embrace the innovation and the innovation in the practice. I mean, we have to turn around, change the page, and of course the pilots are really important because we learn from that, but we need to think in the scalability of the actions that we are doing in order to really to make a change, a significant change. And so in that phase, in that arena, I mean, actors like the initiative with American Fire Initiative and among others, they are putting in the table the conservation with finance, how to formulate a project beyond the economic rationality in order to put all the nature in the variable of the decisions. If we can do that will be a really important matter. I think the discussion between the parties right now is in another level. I mean, Latin America is really concerned because we are facing all the impact of the climate change, but we are not responsible for the emissions. But we are receiving the whole impact, and we are losing the biodiversity. But we know that all the countries need to work together and work with other companies because we have a commitment with the development. As Nigeria, we have people without energy, we have people without water. So, I mean, we have the natural capital in the table, and we have the people in the table, and we need to find the way to promote really integrated projects to do it. So I think that's the most strong argument to build a very good narrative for these kind of discussions. Thank you.
Great. I was going to ask, actually, if you don't mind, Joseph, to make a comment, particularly because I know that you obviously speak to the Nigerian delegation, and I'd be interested in a bit of perspective as to how they would respond to this challenge. So maybe, Joseph, do you want to offer, and if anyone else would like to offer a comment as well, but Joseph, I'd be really interested in your view.
All right, so thank you very much. You see, that is one of the things that we want to see here from this COP29, where we have a joint work program between the the CBD and the UNFCCC. And that is something that we need to really emphasize, and that is what we're pushing with the Nigerian delegation. And that's a message I want to also pass across to everybody, so that we'll be able to, it's not just about the renewable energy, but other aspects also, so that we'll be able to see that synergies, where there will be compromise, at least it will be nature positive, and then where there will be synergies. But if we work in isolation, then we will not be able to see these synergies. And that is why it's very important for us to continue to emphasize that joint work program between the two conventions.
So I'm really glad you said that, Joseph. Just to say, as far as I understand at the moment, is that the good news is we do have some useful text already in the draft NCQG and also Article 6.8 and technology. So even if the energy pledge is not making those links, we have some text at the moment in brackets which are potentially positive. But unless we can follow through on what happened in Cali to try and encourage the closer working between these two conventions, we need that happening here as well. Otherwise, it's always going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Questioned at the back, yeah.
Sorry, I came late, so you might have already addressed this question, but I had a query about the combining the COP. So we had Biodiversity COP and now we're here for climate, but we're talking about biodiversity, and then we're going to meet in Riyadh and talk about desertification. Is it likely that at some point, as people are saying, we will have one merged event? It sounds like a sensible thing to do, but is this just a dream, or do you think it might actually happen one day in the...
It's a great question. I have my own personal views on that, but the panel is on stage. Does anyone want to offer a view as to how we bring the three back together? Joseph.
Yeah, so let me give it a go. And I am for synergies, but the practicality of bringing all the conventions together may be difficult. But there should be where they intersect and work together. So that for me, that would be the most reasonable thing, because the issues we have now, the problem are all interconnected. So should the solutions. Because if we work in silos, then we will not be able to have the synergies that there will be a lot of wastage. Because what you would use a resource to do may answer the question of both biodiversity and climate change, and even the certification. But if you work in silos, you find out that the resources are being spent differently. So there should be synergies, but bringing all of them together as one may be a difficult thing to do. So at least we can start by looking at the area of synergies and see how we can bring them together in that regards. That's my view.
Thanks, Joseph. Elliot, sorry, did Emily, you wanted to come in as well? But sure. Yeah, go on.
Thank you. I mean, to agree with my neighbour, but I think so. Three things. So one is, I think from the perspective, those synergies in the real economy, in most citizens, I think most businesses, they would think about this as one single joined up problem. And so the siloization of the conventions is not necessarily very helpful, but it's a political reality, and actually it's a useful political reality, because it might mean if we didn't have it, we would probably not have the same coverage of all of these different issues. I would note they all arose out of the Earth Summit in 1992. There was I think it was 20 years on, there was a reconvened Earth Summit. I would wonder actually if it would be really helpful at this point, as all of these conversations become much more mature, much more mainstream, to really try and gather that setting again, to actually have a diplomatic approach to really maximizing those synergies. And I think that would be well worth exploring. And I know, and Peter Backer, for example, WBC made a speech at COP16 where I think he called for these things to come together, and I can see the value in that. The other thing I just wanted to say was, in terms of it mattering in the real economy, I think we need to be able to demonstrate the reality of the interconnection of the energy transition and nature. And I don't think either the energy conversation or the nature people are necessarily really yet there. And there are lots of activities. And so my example of this, we've got a project, for example, which is working on pathways for sustainable aviation. And one of the things that is under-recognized there is the scale of the energy demand of aviation, particularly because it's not subject to electrification, which allows you to much greater efficiency in terms of primary energy through to useful energy, which means that if we were to move aviation onto biomass-based sustainable aviation fuels, we're using all the spare biomass in the world. That's it. No other sector really gets much of it. It's all going into aviation. And that's quite a huge challenge, particularly in a world where we're seeing increasing climate impacts, we're seing increasing population, so greater food demand, and we want to hit our biodiversity protection targets. So we want to scale up to get to those 2030 biodiversity targets and beyond. If we were to try and just use renewables-based electrofuels, which would be another option, then we also actually we will almost be doubling the level of power rollout, because the energy demands are so huge. So that's a single sector that's currently a fairly small part of the climate problem, although a really serious part of the climate problem, that has huge implications in terms of land use. And at the same time, the land use conversation is probably one of the most complicated conversations and touches on all three of the conventions. So I think as we work through the practicalities of this, we're going to have to find ways to bring it together in reality, and then the narrative will hopefully adapt to respond to that.
Thanks, Elliot. Emily, I'm going to bring you in. I also just wanted to remind everybody of the amazing work that World Economic Forum does to assess risk to the global economy. And when you look out 10 years, number one is climate change, number three is biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. And so again, when we think about how we bring these things together from an economic perspective and economic drivers point of view, I wonder if you can offer a WEF perspective, partly about the Rio Conventions, but also about a more joined up approach. Because actually, Elliot, in some businesses, I see they've definitely compartmentalized some issues, and they're definitely just focusing on climate, and nature is perhaps not even on the boardroom table. And so I just wonder what you think needs to happen next, Emily, to get these things aligned.
Thanks. I think this also speaks really well to Rebecca's question before too, about thinking about how we get nature included in those commitments in Belém. And I think there's no better setting than it will be on the edge of the rainforest to have those nature commitments as part of nature embedded in those commitments. I quickly wanted to also note that in terms of how we engage with governments often, we're trying to create materials that allow them to tick multiple boxes with single actions. And I know that many in this room are doing that work as well. There's limited capacity to do everything that we want to, sorry, is that better? Limited capacity to do within government. I mean, we are all constrained by budgets and people. And so I think very often in the various work streams that we have, the materials that we provide, we try to indicate how they can be serving the goals and the commitments of that nation to multiple different commitments. So that's one opportunity. I think it's not explicitly linking all of those conventions together, but it's at least allowing the government to take single actions that can address multiple different global goals. In terms of the risk report, I think we're seeing a lot of engagement from the corporate partners of the forum in thinking about that. I mean, I think in terms of, Gonzalo has showcased how Iberdrola is thinking about these things, not in isolation. But to your point, Martin, we do see that in some cases there are totally different places in the House that are dealing with these different issues. And so I think the ongoing discussion of having them all in the same conversation is so important, and that's something that we're working very closely with our partners on right now. Even within the forum, we have different initiatives that we have a CEO Climate Alliance, we also have a CEO Nature Alliance, and so combining the work streams of those has been a really exciting opportunity to have those discussions in one place.
Brilliant, thanks, Emily. Yes, I'm going to say, can I just check how much longer we have? We go till 12, so we have time to keep the conversation going. So I'm going to open it out again. I'll just bring you the microphone.
Hello, everyone. I'm from a Chinese NGO. A Chinese NGO that's dedicated to conservation in China, and because we are doing a project on the renewable energy companies' impact on biodiversity, and we also are in consultation with a lot of renewable energy companies in China, and also they have a lot of questions on these issues actually. And one of the questions that we are also, we don't know how to answer that, is that how Chinese renewable energy companies can minimize their impacts on biodiversity and the local communities where they are going abroad, actually, when they going global. And also because they have distrust issues for the overseas NGOs, and they trust us, like we speak Chinese, we communicate with them more comfortably. And this is the first questions. And the second question is the supply chain problem, and also because this is also be asked when we are discussing with them, that they have supply chain problem that they are asked by the investors, that for example the mining problem, because for example the wind turbines have a lot of issues with the minings, and the coal bed, the rare earth issues, and the two problem maybe some, yes.
Thank you so much for your question. I don't know who wants to pick up the point either, because in many ways it's the practical solutions that one's looking for in terms of renewables in harmony with nature, but then also the supply chain thing. Who would like to offer a view? Okay, Gonzalo. You have many scars on your back because of this agenda, but you're coming through it, Gonzalo, so go for it.
I mean, this is a very interesting question because it's how to do it. for us, we are not expert on nature, energy companies. So for us, the only way is to work in alliances and to rely on science. And you mentioned the word trust. I think this is the most scarce resource nowadays. We all know that we have to work in alliances with NGOs, with universities, but it's not easy to work on alliances. This is the reality. So I think it's difficult because it's not easy to work with other people with different interests. But when you really build a good alliance, it can have a very deep, transformative, and systemic changes. So I think it's very good investment to work in alliances. And why? Because firms, we have our strengths, but NGOs have their strengths, and universities and government. So when you have a common vision, this is the point, when you have a common vision and you share your strengths, and I think Marta mentioned that you focus on the things you agree, I think alliances are the way to move forward. And because this is one of everyone is talking about alliances, but I think to work on alliance means to be humble. You need to be humble to understand or to recognize that you need others, that you cannot solve the problem alone. You have to be generous. This is really important, and for firms, for instance, you have to be generous with think tanks, with NGOs, and you have to be rigorous. This is very important, and good professionals. So this is to say that in China, I mean, is a challenge, of course, but if you are an NGO, an environmental NGO, and you work, I don't know the situation in China, but in Spain, if you just build trust with firms, with the private sector, and with the government, you really change things. And we were saying about the importance, what do we do next COP? And I agree, we have to be innovative. We have to do something different to assure that this is done in harmony, and we are not succeeding so far. So when you work on alliances, it's easier to be more creative and more innovative and more impactful, because when you work together, you are much stronger.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I don't know anyone else wants to offer a view either on the practical solutions or indeed the supply chain, Marta? Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. I think biodiversity is quite complex. I mean, and but I think we don't have a complete answer, unfortunately. But we have very good examples, and I think BirdLife could be a very good example of that. And and in the way they are putting together around the same table a specific objective. We are talking about BirdLife and birds. So what is the impact? So that's a very good experience. So what is the impact that we are facing in terms of the birds, and how we are going to deal in a specific area or sector with that? So sorry, personally, I don't have the answer, but there's a very good example of how we can deal. When we start to talk with BirdLife and Audubon, the climate change team was really resilient to talk about it. I mean, what? And it's the climate change team. I mean, they have been working in this field for many years. And now we are doing, 2 years after that, we are doing that. So we have another project in Guayas, which is in Ecuador, which is a really important project in a very biodiversity area. And this is a very good example also. So we are trying to innovate, try to make some projects, and try to have some examples to include in another pipeline of projects to move forward.
Great. I think also Joseph will I think Joseph and Elliot would like to offer a view.
Yes, so if I'll talk from the civil society point of view and also about building trust, that's very important. People have doubts when they are not involved in a process. And usually to get them involved in the process is to start it right from the outset. I'm sure they have done some things wrongly. That is why they lost trust. But going forward, what are they going to do? And they can do it in an independent way. And one of the ways that we have shown here is tools like the Avistep and the IBAT that can be all-inclusive because it's been scientifically proven. And then you get the communities to be involved in the process and they see how it is. So it's kind of independent. Whatever the findings are, is independent of the company. So everybody sees it in a transparent manner, and then they will be able to build trust from the communities. Now, they may have, as I said, for the past projects, they may have lost trust, but going forward is good practice that they are able to implement such projects with these tools, and they have them together so that it will be an all-encompassing with everybody involved in it, but the community members, their leaders, and all. We talked about synergies and so on, so that can build up, because alone they will not be able to do it, and they will continue to lose the currency of trust, which is very important for every project. I think that's the point of view I want to add.
Thanks, Joseph. Elliot?
Two very quick points. So firstly, on the trust issue, somebody said at the front, trust is really important nowadays, and I just wanted to call that out and say, like, we are in a more geopolitically challenging world than the world has been in for a long time, and it will only get, the trajectory ahead looks like that's only going to increase. We're in a more politically polarized world within most countries than we have been in for a long time. And we can't ignore that. We have to be aware of that. We have to think about how that affects and shapes all our efforts and activities. And fundamentally, from my perspective, the single most important thing to building trust is dialogue, open dialogue, genuine dialogue, where you're listening to each other. And so we need to have more dialogues like we're having in this whole forum. It's difficult, it's messy, but it's really important. Second piece on the supply chains, you talked about minerals and metals. If we're moving from a fossil fuel-based economy to essentially a power-based economy, we are the volume of extractive activity of mining and drilling is going to go down, because the amount of stuff that we need from under the ground and under the sea and all those kind of places is smaller, purely. But the kind of things that we need, so we're moving into more minerals and metals, more things like rare earth metals, and the reality is that is usually the mining for that is messier and dirtier and takes up more space, and we have to navigate that. And that's a particularly important place, because actually it matters for biodiversity and it matters for community engagement. People really don't like big dirty mines near where they live, and that is something, and it's terrible for biodiversity, for water purity, all those kind of things. So we're going to have to find ways to resolve that. And for me, that's a challenge, but also it's a reason why it's really important we look at things like the circular economy, because making sure that we make the most, and we make the resources that we have deliver the most, is going to be really, really important going forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Elliot. We probably have time for one more question from the group, and then I'm going to ask, while we get the last question, then also in answer to that final question, I'd also like you each to say what one action you would propose is needed to help address this issue. So I'm going to ask you in your final comment to say what is the priority action that you think is necessary to make progress in this area. But you can think about that while we have the last question.
Thank you very much. Well, my question is rather a response to Elliot's comment about sustainability choice and economic choice, blah, blah, blah. A few months ago, UBS Asset Management released a kind of the guideline for investors about the engagement of renewable energy, particularly offshore wind energy. Do you think that kind of investor movement, or like TNFD disclosure, which already Iberdrola started, because I read that part, that kind of disclosure, because I was in TNFD task force alternate member before, so that kind of financial disclosure and also the investor movement would change the kind of existing scheme about renewable energy and biodiversity relationship?
Shall I kick off and then also do my action? I feel I'm trying to work out if there's a longer answer to this, but I think the answer from my perspective is actually quite simple in terms of that's an important step. It's very necessary, very helpful. It's not sufficient. So, and I think we need to. So I don't think anybody necessarily thought it was, but part of what I was saying in terms of where we're at in terms of the sustainability movement is there's been a lot of effort been put into disclosure. There's been a lot of effort put into corporate target setting. Those are both really important actions that we've supported and other people have supported. They're not going to get us there. They're not enough. They're not, because they in and of themselves, so they can build momentum, they can build understanding, they can generate a lot of good projects and good activities and show the way. But in order to get the economy transitioning at scale, we need bigger factors. We need systematic incorporation of risk into financial decisions. We need regulation to restrict the unhelpful things. We need to be able to kind of find systemic answers to the green premium that exists and makes certain things more important. And then my one action, I hate these kind of things. I'm terrible at, people ask me what my favorite song is, and I'm like, well, I've got 5 that I can think of right now, and they're probably...
Come on, Elliot. Come on, Elliot. The one.
My one thing that I would probably, that I've been thinking of is, and it comes back to the thing that you asked me before, or we talked about before. So I think we need to get better at place-based decision-making. We need to be able to do good place-based decision-making that incorporates the views of communities, incorporates the importance of protecting and preserving biodiversity, and incorporates the need to move forward in the economy, and finds ways to effectively and relatively quickly make those trade-offs in a way that it doesn't always go in a particular direction, but we need to be able to stop some stuff, and we need to be able to do some stuff, and we need to make that decision-making quicker and better.
That was a brilliant one, action. Just come down the line. Joseph, next.
Okay, so thank you very much. So one thing that I will call for is for data and metrics, and availability, so that every company will be able to see exactly what they need to do, and it's globally available, so that they will see their contribution to climate change, so that their contribution to nature, the global drive for nature positivity, so that everybody will be, it will be very transparent and it will be very clear. By this, we will avoid greenwashing, we will avoid just doing things for doing sake, but indeed there will be practical impact on nature positive, and also it will also help in them, even in their own business case as well. It will help them to be able to make things the way it should be.
Thank you, Joseph. Emily?
I think from our side, as we're excited about the businesses that are continuing to push that envelope and thinking about their nature dependencies and their ability to raise the bar, I think connecting that with this government and financial institution work to ultimately prioritize capital to businesses and projects that are promoting both climate and biodiversity.
Thank you for that, Emily. Gonzalo?
For me, it would be to build trust. To build trust between NGOs, firms, and governments to accelerate an energy or a climate action compatible with biodiversity, because this is urgent, it's necessary, and it's possible.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Martha?
One, and we are seeing here, sorry, thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry, you're right, thank you. So, part of the ingredients are, first, the sector cross-collaboration. That's really important. Very important. Because usually we are seeing with the only one focus in each sector, so we are working with another collaboration. So it's open your mind, in order to find another solutions. Second, try to look beyond the traditional partners. No, That's something that can show you another way to do it, another kind of solutions. And I think the last, but not the least, of course, I mean, everybody's talking about finance. And I think finance, I mean, if you have a very good project, you are going to find the money. I mean, you don't need to demonstrate anything else. I mean, the project itself is going to sell all the benefits. So if we can integrate all the aspects in a very good way, I mean, the finance would be for the projects. I mean, I'm completely sure about it. But that means that we are also have to spend every dollar in a very good way in order to put together all the benefits that we are trying to highlight: climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development. Because Joseph said, and it's really, really important. I mean, the people is in the table, the biodiversity is in the table, the future is in the table. So that's why I think that's the really important things. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. And look, thank you so much to all of you for helping to shape today's conversation. It is Energy Day, and I'm just going to leave you with a few sort of thoughts. So firstly, we still need to make sure we have the right ambition. So we are in a nature and climate emergency, so we need a joined-up response. So earlier we heard the need to make sure that the recommendations coming out of this COP reflect the need that we need greater alliance between the nature and climate response. And that's for government, and it's for this process as well to deliver that. And then, of course, we need governments, private sector, and indeed civil society to do the things that only they can do. So the policy, regulatory, and finance environment needs to be encouraging the fast transition at a price that the taxpayers can afford, but at the same time, least harm to nature, framing that in the right way. And then we absolutely need to make sure that we have the right knowledge to inform those debates. And the good news is there is a lot of good, innovative tools out there. And just 2 plugs from BirdLife. Firstly, please do check out our Avastep avian sensitivity mapping tool, because that's essentially a risk-based tool which can help guide renewable developments in the right way. And the second thing is the integrated biodiversity assessment tool, which is available to all investors and governments to help them understand the impacts of their activity. And I just think one of the really big things, two final points for me, that came out really clearly on this panel, this incredible importance to engage with others who have different perspectives, to build trust within those communities. That needs to happen, I think, at a strategic level, and as Elliot said, also at a place-based level. And that is essential, because unless we do this together, then we're going to end up with trade-offs, and we don't want to have winners and losers. We want everyone to win from this. And finally, it, I think, requires leadership. And you've had leadership from this panel today, from different sectors, and we are going to require government leadership, banking leadership, and at the same time we'll need leadership from the private sector and amazing advocates like Joseph from the civil society community. So I just want to end today with a plea to all of you, in your conversations for the rest of the COP, try and make sure we get greater alliance between the nature agenda and, of course, the energy agenda. And please, 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 just end by thanking our amazing panel, by giving them a round of applause. Thank you so much. And just to say, there are some, please come and have a chat with colleagues. We have 3 BirdLife people in the room as well. Noel is here, Kathy's here. If you want to ask any more about BirdLife's work, please come and find us. But thank you very much.